Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Root Institute. I am Maiysha. I am managing editor of The Globe at The Root. And I'm so happy to be here today with Dr. Tressie McMillan Cottom. Now, if you are not familiar with this brilliant mind, she is a research professor at UNC Chapel Hill School, a New York Times contributing opinion writer, and the author of several books, including the National Book Award finalist Thick and Other Essays, which is one of my favorite books. She is also the co-host of the podcast Here to Slay with Roxane Gay, and just happens to be a 2020 MacArthur genius. So, we couldn't really ask for a better mind to be joining us for the Institute, and we have many. So I hope you're tuning into all of our shows during this series. But we are having, a really interesting moment in culture. And Tressie, one of the reasons we wanted to have you on is because you are not just a brilliant mind in the academic space, but you've also become quite the cultural critic. And what we're here to talk about today is the idea of the Black Renaissance that was introduced earlier this year, and really also the idea of Black criticism. Where does Black criticism sit within this Black Renaissance? Now, to give some context, the so-called Black Renaissance, or the third wave of, was introduced by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi in Time's Black Renaissance issue for Black History Month this year. I'm sure he's not the only one to say it, but he is the one to curate an entire issue about it. And what he boldly declared during that issue was, that Black novelists, poets, filmmakers, producers, musicians, playwrights, artists, and writers finally got the white judge off of our heads. We are no longer focused on making white people comfortable or uncomfortable, he says. We also got the Black judge off of our heads. We refuse to carry the race on our shoulders. We are tired of being race representatives. We've escaped the shaming politics of respectability. We are showing that our Black lives have meaning and depth beyond white people. Of course, I think we can agree with all of that, but I also wonder, as a journalist, and want to ask you, Tressie, as someone who is deeply observant of Black life and of how that fits into American life in particular, how did that sit with you? This idea of this Black Renaissance?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I want it to be true. I love this idea that we have entered into an era of unself-conscious cultural production, which is what I think Ibram was signaling. And so I think there are a couple of things. My first kind of thought, I remember reading that, and there was another really big piece too, maybe about a year before Ibram's, and the writer is escaping me, but I think it was another Black scholar, another Black male scholar, I might add. I think there's something to that. Maybe we can get in this a little bit, who was declaring this sort of, a new Black, I think is what a new Black art era is what the other piece was talking about. So I think it's something that has been in circulation. I mean, historically, though, if we think about in the continuum of Black cultural production, Black artists have been both saying and claiming that since we have sort of like a written record of our cultural production. I mean, I don't think anyone, for example, could dismiss that Zora Neale Hurston was engaged in that conversation, that Richard Wright was engaged in that conversation, that certainly by the time we talk about the Black arts movement of the 1970s, that there was a very sort of radical resistance to the idea of both the white gaze and Black respectability in the art that we produce. So I don't know that our era is new. It's like most things. I mean, I'm so boring with this. I got one line. Everything is historically contingent, right? It's on a continuum. I do think one of the things I think that Ibram is pointing out is that it is certainly it's easier, I think, to produce, to access, and to catalog that work. So one of the things that I think has changed is that kind of artistic vein has always been in Black American cultural tradition, but we haven't always had the means to preserve it. Right? You think about all of the art that we've lost because we didn't control the means of distribution for film, for example, or we don't control the cultural institutions like museums, the places that are responsible in our culture for enshrining what matters and what's archived. I think about that a lot. So now I think those politics of what gets remembered and lifted up have changed. But listen, I don't want to diminish the fact that Black artists under some very trying historical circumstances have always been resisting the white gaze, have always been resisting Black respectability politics in our art. But this is a fun and exciting time. I mean, just as a consumer of Black culture, like, I'm having a ball. I mean, there's too much to watch. There's too much to read. There's too much to participate in. It feels like a fullness, this moment. I don't know, though, that is new. I just think it's our time. We always think our time is special, right? But this is just our moment.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And, one of the things, and I know one of the reasons we wanted to speak to you about this in particular, you said something in Thick, I'm going to paraphrase this, where you talked about the fact that there had never really been a more opportune time to be a Black thinker, a Black, I guess, thought leader. We love to use that term. So, and I definitely think that you were considered one of them, and a thought leader in general. But additionally, you talked about this idea, and I guess this is what comes up for me when you talk about a Black Renaissance. I mean, a Renaissance infers that something was over. And you also wrote in Thick that Black is not over, right? or this whole, or you were idea about Blackness being over. Do you see this idea of Blackness coming in waves, and who gets to decide that? This whole trendiness. Are we just in again right now? Because obviously those of us of a certain age remember being in, in the late 90s.
Do you not remember? I was about to say, do you not remember the late 90s when it was like, especially in television, like it was a huge thing. We're having this renaissance in Black television. Oh yeah, I was there. I remember this. That's part of it. You just get older and you remember the cycles.
I remember the African medallions. I remember it's a Black thing. You just wouldn't understand. And I mean, interestingly enough, I mean, this brings me to something I was going to touch on later and we probably will circle back to. But, I found it interesting that in that Renaissance issue, this was identified as the third wave behind the Black arts movement and the Harlem Renaissance. And I found myself thinking like, but what about the Y2K Renaissance? Like there was a millennial Renaissance that happened there among people who were not millennials. And you recently did the cover story for Vanity Fair, the September issue. Let's make sure we say it's a September issue because that's the biggest issue of the year, which starred none other than Diddy. I know we're now supposed to call him Love, but he's going to be Puffy or Diddy to me forever and ever. And I would say, and I think you say in that article, that he led a renaissance as well, in many ways, or he was part of that generation of tastemakers and culture creators, where it was more than just a sound, it was more than just a look, it was a whole cultural moment. So I guess that's why I asked the question: do you think that Blackness really comes in, or do you think we're out?
Yeah, I was just about to say. So see, I never think that Black goes out of style. I do think that what happens when you talk about like the three eras of legitimate Black cultural moments, when you move from the Harlem Renaissance to the Black arts movement to this new moment in the new Black cultural renaissance, I think some of what is being said is that the art that matters, we're talking highbrow art. Let's be clear. There's a certain amount of like, we matter now to elite cultural institutions in the way that we did during the Harlem Renaissance. And rightfully so. I think Black people have a certain a very healthy amount of respect for those moments. But the moments that have happened in between have arguably been just as powerful, but they happen among middlebrow and lowbrow art, the kind of art that Black folks don't always like to claim, right? So we don't always like to claim Homeboys in Outer Space or Malik Yoba in what's my show? I'm really dating myself now. New York Undercover. We don't want to claim Little Kim, right? We don't want to claim Mobb Deep as a sort of, but that arguably we will live longer with the changes that happen in Black middlebrow and lowbrow cultural production of the 80s and 90s, arguably far longer than we will with elite cultural production, because popular culture is the culture that shifts. Political scientists talk about the Overton window. That's the culture that shifts the window. Frankly, elite cultural production tends to lag. And so this is why I don't want to like own fully the idea that we are in a uniquely Renaissance era of Black culture production, because it does ignore so much of the culture that frankly bubbled up from lower income Black American cultures and communities, that bubbled up from things like hip hop, that bubbled up from people who are frankly never going to have a retrospective at Harvard, or they're never going to make it into the Whitney, or when they do, it'll be far later, but that is also culture, and that is also part of what we contribute. And it has been just as powerful. I mean, the global culture right now is hip hop globally. There's nowhere you can't go in the world that doesn't speak hip hop, right? That is arguably just as important as anything that comes out of arts and letters. And I think sort of bracketing these cultural eras is a way to sort of diminish that contribution, or it certainly at least has that effect of diminishing it. And yeah, like you, I was there. I know how important it was when you saw the first rappers in a television commercial. Right? Mm-hmm. Is it consumerist? Absolutely. But guess what? So is American culture. Participating in American culture and defining it means being consumerist. And I don't think we can disavow that any more than we can, disavow Toni Morrison. They're all part of the culture that creates Black art. And it's arguably just as important.
I mean, I entirely agree with you, because I mean, even if we are reaching back past the 90s, I'm thinking of iconic moments like watching Michael Jackson debut Thriller, or doing the moonwalk at 125, or, all of these were moments in American culture that for those of us who were there, or watching him for the first time on MTV, if you're part of the MTV generation like myself, it's like, oh my gosh, there's a Black person on MTV, right? But you did kind of hit on something here. And you hit on it in other writing that you've done as well. In fact, I read one of your abstracts as I was, preparing myself for this fireside chat, and it was, "Who do you think you are when marginality meets academic micro-celebrity?" And you define micro-celebrity as referring to the effective capital engendered and commodified by various social and new media platforms where identity and brand are merged and measured in likes, shares, follows, comments, etc. Now, obviously, to be clear to our audience here, you were referring specifically in this abstract to how your experience of, let's say, the comment sections differ very distinctly from other leaders in the space, other people that, get that kind of attention. And it's very much due to your identity. But I do feel like we are in an era where criticism has become democratized by social media in ways. And one of the things I think you just hit on when you were talking there, it's like, I sometimes feel it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because as an academic, obviously you're pressed to engage. People want your opinion. We want to know what, what the thinkers think, right? But also, do you feel that the criticism, do you think the balance is there? The balance is being struck between access and elitism when it comes to how we are centering art, how we are critiquing art, how we're engaging with what we call art?
Balance, no. And I'm not sure a balance can be achieved. I love that you read that, by the way. Thank you so much for that. Because I do think there's a broader, I was talking very narrowly about who gets to be considered a thought leader, for lack of a better word, a public intellectual in digital spaces. But everybody can become a micro celebrity in digital spaces. That's part of their cultural and economic power. That's why we love the platforms, right? Theoretically, if you're good enough and you put it out on the internet, you will find an audience, you will build a micro audience who then can turn you into a voice that needs to be reckoned with in the cultural domain. Frankly, some of our best writers right now who are out there working came up through those new media spaces. And I don't think that's an accident. Those spaces have been, for better or worse, and there's a little bit of both, more accessible to women, Black people, especially Black women, to queer writers and thinkers, to all kinds of like sexual minorities and alternative thinkers, counter hegemonic thinkers. Those spaces, yes, they have some economic insecurity issues. Yes, they can be sort of predatory in how they use some of those writers and thinkers. But the fact is, for perhaps our first time in popular culture, the people who make the art and the people who make it matter can also be critics of it. And they can find an audience and they can talk to them. And that is extremely threatening, I think, to a lot of cultural institutions. Now, on the flip side, let me be real, all of that ain't good. And all of it isn't me.
Get to this part.
Yeah, all of it isn't necessarily engaging in like well-intentioned criticism, the kind that is designed to make the art better, right? All of it isn't doing that. But I think our trade-off is look at who we get to read now. Look at who I get to see. I can read Soraya McDonald, or I can read a Adam Harris. I can read these writers, and I would not have been able to read them in mainstream cultural institutions. And of that, I'm very certain. So that it does give us that moment, but it means that as an audience, we have to be more discerning or come up with our own way of like filtering out that cacophony of voices and sort of finding the critical community that is really invested in the art they're critiquing, because that's the key. I think being a Black critic is about, in a way that being a white critic is not. You're invested in the art. The art matters to you even if you don't like it, right? That's what our kinship ties mean. We want the art that comes from our people, right, to be at least interesting. Doesn't always have to be good, but it has to be interesting, and it, I think, has to be faithful to Black people's lives and experiences in a way. And I've always thought that that's what distinguishes, you know, Black critics from white critics. We care, right? We don't get that social distance of, you know, critiquing something from a remove. And so I think that as an audience, and we might be at the point where we're asking too much of the audience right now, because it's really hard, admittedly, to like filter all of those voices, to find the criticism that is invested in the art is critiquing. But I've got to think that's better than our previous system of relying on outside voices to tell us what matters. So I don't know if we have struck a balance. I do think that this moment is probably more about how much the audience has changed, as much as it is about how the way we make art and critique it has changed. The audience, and they're coming along, I think, and in many ways are pushing the rest of us. They have higher expectations. They expect more. They expect more critical insight and reflection. They expect you to demonstrate that you care. And that you're invested, and that's good. But it can be hard, I think, for an audience to find that sweet spot. And that's just a constant trade-off, I think, between being democratic and then being a culture.
Well, yeah. And you and I have both been in this position. I know we've both lived with comment sections. I know we've both had to subject criticism for criticism, because then, our critiques get criticized. And I do you think that we are, do you think that we are ready to, because of the saturation of the, in the space now of Black art, Black thought, obviously there can always be more. I'm always here for more. But do you think we are ready to move past the place of being expected to unconditionally love all Black offerings?
I gotta hope so. I mean, I think there's a lot of well-intentioned, feeling the mantle and the pressure of being one of a few and one of a only group of people in like a newsroom, for example, or in a media company that is responsible for what, I've called derisively in the past, sarcastically, the Black beat. You're on the Black beat.
That is yes.
Oh my God. The Black beat. This is in part what the root is founded to, like, in a response to, right? A critical response to that. There's like this, there's a heterogeneity and a nuance and a breadth of like Black art and politics that means no one person can be on the Black beat. It just doesn't even make any sense, right? But that's how it functions in most media institutions. I don't have to tell you this. It's how it functions in most of academia. In newsrooms, there's the one, maybe if you're lucky, two people responsible for covering the depth and breadth of Black creative life. And I think that people get in that space and feel responsible for holding things up with love because they do feel the pressure of being that if you don't read it here, you're not going to get it anywhere. And so you see all of this really reflexive explanation and defensiveness, and that is just not a good place to do really great work from for anyone. It's really hard to defend against the critics of criticism, as you describe it, which is very apt. You can't be on the defensive and make a really good affirmative case for anything, good or bad. That's why it matters that we have our own spaces to do that. That's why, for all its problems, the power of Black Twitter has been, it has proven that we are not a monolith and that you cannot treat us as such, and that we value insightful criticism as much as any other group of people. And holding people's feet to the fire on that. I don't know that Black people have struggled with that as much as we have struggled with the economics of being responsible for protecting Blackness from white institutions, right? Because when you pull that away, you see the brilliance of Black critics. You see what's possible. So I know that's not us. I know what that is. That's the pressures of it, right? Are we past that moment? The audience for sure is. I think the critics are past it. The economics of doing it for white audiences, however, I think that pressure is still there, will probably always be there. But listen, I'm intensely proud these days of some of the stuff that I'm reading from Black critics who are refusing to love something for the sake of it just being Black. I love it. And saying I can do that out of love. That is a form of a fierce sort of a feminist love, by the way. That's women's love. That's a mother love. That I'm going to love you the way you need, not necessarily the way you want, right? That's a very, right? I think it just goes at the heart of sort of like masculinist criticism that is, trying to be the sage on the stage and tell you what to think. No, Black feminist criticism is, I'm just going to love you hard. I'm going to love the hell out of you. And I do see that inclination, and I'm extremely proud of it. And so joyful to be part of an audience that gets to read it. It's really amazing.
You talked earlier about, and I'm glad you brought up that is a Black feminist love, and I agree with you. And I don't know, I think it's tricky for all of us, whether you're an academic or a journalist or both. In your case, it is there is this line, right, between wanting to remind the community, look, I am here with you. And I love you enough to want you to be better at this thing, And then I think there's days that we get tired too, right? We get tired of taking the criticism. We get tired of having to do that dance and that performance.
Indeed.
But one of the things that I, love that you write about constantly is about the need for particularly Black female criticism, for Black women's voices, for there to be more in the conversation, whether that's as an opinion writer for the Times like you are now, or just in critical spaces in general, doing critical theory. And what we've seen in the past few years, I mean, I think it's worth noting, it'll be a few weeks out by the time that, this airs, but it's worth noting that we're having this conversation in the middle of the criminal trial for R. Kelly. Right.
I was just, that's what I was thinking. Yes, absolutely. That we would not be having if it had not been for Black women. We would not be here.
That's right. I mean, I'm a Chicagoan. I'm having this conversation with you from Chicago. I know you have a Chicago history as well. So this whole mother love thing that we've been talking about, this whole familial love thing, for me, when we talk about criticism in this particular context, and we saw it also, with the Cosby situation, this allegiance, to a Black artist in spite of, right? As if we were afraid to tell the truth about this thing because it would dismantle the truth about so many other things that we, need to feel that we've got sort of construct. How do you hope that moments like these, because I mean, again, arguably Black Twitter drove that conversation, Black feminists drove that conversation.
Yep.
It was, us continually, like, again and again, foot on the neck, like, no.
Yep. For 10 years, if you tried to write or say anything about R. Kelly, 5,000 Black women showed up. Like, it was a constant pressure. Yeah. That was just, remarkable.
Absolutely. So what is, how has that hit you, I guess, as a sociologist and as a critic? Because I mean, you study,
Mm-hmm.
you're studying human behavior, you're studying social behavior. Um, what kind of, does it give you optimism? Does it give you hope? Does it
Yeah.
excite?
It's so funny. I was talking to my mother yesterday, as one does every day. And I was every day. Try not to check in, just try and see what happens. And I was telling her, my mother's having a late in life feminist moment, which I think a lot of maybe older women do. Their children are gone. It's her just sitting there staring at my dad. I think a lot of them are, her and her girlfriends, and she's joined a little gang. And I think they're all having their Black feminist moment. And I was telling her, I know, right? And I was telling her how much inspiration, and I mean this like in a real sense, I don't mean this in the, hyperbolic sense, how often I read young Black women in particular, young non-binary Black people who are just relentless in how courageous they are about actually living the things that we theorized. Right. So they're taking very seriously. When you talked about, you say the R. Kelly thing about how many of us were implicated in reproducing R. Kelly because we were afraid of the questions that would open up about the other constructs that ordered our lives. That's all that was. Because we have to ask the question about R. Kelly. We have to ask the question about our uncle. Yeah. And this is, what started a chain reaction, and how this generation of Black women thinkers and writers and artists and consumers and audience members just went at that fearlessly is remarkable to me, because it also feels like it happened so suddenly. I'm sure it didn't, but it feels like it. We really did wake up to a moment where people said, no, you told us to think about this. And so we're taking you at your word.
Yeah. But it did feel like it took 20 years and then overnight. Like it definitely, as somebody who grew up, around the corner from that high school where, he used to sit in that parking lot and, knew those people. I mean, I still live in that neighborhood. And, so yeah, it felt like it was 20 years and then like 2 days.
Right.
And
people were listening, and we had the microphone, but the work that it took for for them to get us there. And it's not to say that, I think older Black women weren't there, but really, I cannot say enough for how much younger Black women and non-binary folks really held our feet to the fire. That gives me more hope than just about anything in the world right now. Not that we will always get it right. And I think this is important to say. Not that we will always get it right, but that we are constantly iterating a way of asking questions that holds ourselves responsible in a way that I don't think has ever been historically true. I think we are holding ourselves responsible in a way that feels really new and urgent. And that might be, for me, the most exciting part of any sort of Black renaissance that's happening. That we are saying, like, yeah, I want to party with you, and I will do pop culture, and I want to have a good time, but I'm also going to think that thing through about what it means and for whom it means something and who's missing here in this conversation. And I just think that it is remarkable, and arguably I predict and hope, probably what I should say is I hope. I'm a sociologist, I'm not supposed to predict anything. What I hope is that that's the most lasting thing from any moment that we're having right now. The art will change, people's interest in Black people will change, that always happens. But I think that this mode of engagement and of asking questions and how we critique things is the real benefit of this moment.
I think it's a huge benefit of this moment. And again, I think, again, this democratizing of criticism, of just even art in general. I mean, when we look at the artists who have been able to thrive based on social media, like we would not have a Cardi B, we would not have a Lil Nas X, we would not have, and these people are, however you feel about those particular artists and what they create. I mean, I personally, as a journalist, as a person, as a Black person, I personally think they're important, because I think about, like I was trying to explain to somebody, I was like, well, does Cardi B check all the boxes that we need to be checked for everybody? Of course not. You know what I mean?
No.
Like,
No.
She still checks certain boxes in terms of color and you know, a certain and this and that and the third. But she's not Beyonce, right? She's the type of girl that other girls needed to see out there, right? Same with Lil Nas X, who has used the internet. I mean, he's used social media like, I mean, it's a tool, it's a weapon, it's a Swiss Army
knife.
He's
a genius at it. He's a genius at it. He is just incredible.
Absolutely. And forcing these conversations and even forcing us to then take to task some of our, you know, more problematic phase, some of our hip hop uncles, if you will,
who are not having a good moment. You know how we said we woke up after 20 years and it was boom, boom, boom? It's like they didn't wake up.
I know.
They missed a very important week of class. I tell you what, I don't know.
I mean, between the anti-vaxxing and the homophobia, and I just don't know what to do with it all.
I saw someone suggesting recently that there should be some sort of retraining boot camp. They were like, truly out of love, some of us need to get together with the elder men of hip hop and have a sit down on everything from science to culture. Like, this is what you missed. But it does feel like, again, that so many people did get the assignment, as they say. Some people understood the assignment. And some people missed out the school entirely. And there's a real divergence. I've never felt so, like, the generational divide has never felt so tangible to me in culture and in art and in criticism.
Also very gendered as well, it feels.
So gendered. It's the part that they cannot.
Yeah, to your point, I see many more of the women of that generation and your mother's generation coming kind of like, you know, continuing to evolve than I am the men.
Yes. So here's the weird thing. Someone like a Lil Nas X could save them from themselves, right? If they would listen and if they had humility about what a Lil Nas X, and I want to be careful because I think it might be they is the pronoun. They might do they and their, so I'm going to go with they. I think my mind is bad, but they have, you know, they are pushing the envelope on freeing people in hip hop from the masculinist expectations of what you have to perform. That has frankly made so many of those hip hop elders vulnerable. The reason why they have such poor health outcomes, the last year we've lost almost half a whole generation of hip hop male artists that really statistically should still be alive. And I've got to think that freeing themselves of some of the masculine performance that hip hop expected of you in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, the kind that Lil Nas X is critiquing and responding to, would really set them free in an honest sort of way. But, you know, I don't know that it's my job to get them there, but I do think it is important for us to not leave people behind in the culture when they can still be saved. I just, you know, I'm not sure always that I'm the right person to do it, but I do think that is also important work for building a continuity in our community, right? I think we need them there. But yeah, they're not having a good season.
Well, you know, you actually led me to my final question, which is, you know, I don't know that we can have a conversation. I mean, we could talk about the Black Renaissance all day, and I think you and I probably will continue to speak about.
I would love to. I'd love to,
because it's exciting. You know, it is exciting. You know, as a well, I don't know that I'm ever a former artist, but as a Black artist and a Black journalist, it is exciting to watch. I know for you, as a Black creator and a Black critic and a Black academic, exciting to watch. But we can't really have a conversation about criticism without having a conversation about cancel culture, right? I think it exists.
Absolutely not. No. The cancel culture, listen, you want me to go, okay, yeah. If there's a cancel culture, it's certainly not what has been labeled cancel culture. What has been labeled cancel culture is the democratization of institutions and culture that we've been talking about today. It is that you cannot take for granted the assumptions and the beliefs of an audience, and that audience's inability to hold you responsible for the assumptions that you have made. That's all. You now have to think about the implications of your joke. You now have to think about the different histories that get brought into a classroom. You have to think about the different audiences who are now reading or consuming your work. That's all. It's just shared responsibility. And a democratic society was always supposed to share the risk of participating in the public discourse and in public life. And that's all that most people are experiencing. As the adage goes, however, the loss of privilege to some people feels like oppression. And so they are acting out to a loss of privilege, but that does not mean that they are oppressed. Having said that, if there's a real cancel culture, its history is in the erasure of Black people's lives and experiences and intellectual production from the nation's meta archive. The fact that we constantly have to rediscover, recontextualize, and reintroduce this world constantly to our value as creators and as intellectuals, as thinkers and as artists and people, that has always, always been the only cancel culture, and that absolutely still exists. So at the same time that you see white men, comedians flailing about because they can no longer tell the joke about mental health or about sexual violence, they are the same people who can still completely erase us from a television show and call it New York City, who can completely erase us from programming and call that prestige television, right? That cancel culture still exists, and we've never been able to label it as such. And it's the only one that actually fundamentally matters.
Well, leave it to you to bring us full circle, because you just basically explain why we need a Black Renaissance. And I thank you for that.
Hello.
McMillan Cottom, you are a genius. Thank you so much. MacArthur didn't need to tell us you are a genius. Thank you so much for joining us for the Root Institute this year. It has been a pleasure to talk to you. And
it really has. And I'm going to hold you to that. When we can go back in real life, we should have drinks and dinner. I will hold you to that.
I would love it. I would love it. I would love it. But I hope everybody engages with your work. Y'all can, the podcast is still going, right? I know you guys are both very busy.
We're on break. We're on our season break.
All right.
Roxanne and I are talking right now. Yep.
That's right. So everybody check out Here to Slay. And if you have not already read Thick, please do, because it's incredible. Thick and Other Essays. All right. We'll see you guys next time.